Hello and welcome to the Dyno Six-Pack Dynasty Football Podcast. I'm your host, JJ Schultz, and today we have one of our Dynasty Six-Pack brethren, Mase Riney, joining us. He's kind of like our resident IDP expert, or one of them on our website. We'll kind of talk about it more later, but you've been crushing it in like the rankings contest over, I believe it's Fantasy Pros that does it for the IDP side too. We're going to break down a lot of IDP talk on the Dynasty side. We haven't done that at all this year. I've been really wanting to get you on here to do this. So, Mase, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you kind of started getting into IDP and where we can kind of find some of your work.
Yeah. So mainly all of my stuff is on Fantasy Six Pack. I don't think Joe would let me have anything else anywhere. No, I'm just kidding. Rankings, honestly, they're on the Fantasy Pros ECR, like you were saying. I do both offense and defense. I'm a lot better at defense than I am offense. I'm all right at quarterbacks and stuff. But so the whole reason why I started is COVID was going on. I was about to get engaged, and my fiance was pretty much just like, please stop talking to me about football. So I went online. I ended up getting a writing gig at a place over the UK. A great friend of mine, Murph, put me on, and he was like, what do you want to write about? And I was like, dude, I want to write about streamers. And he's like, well, anyone can write about streamers. He's like, what do you hate about fantasy football? I was like, I hate IDP. I don't understand it. He was like, fantastic. You're our new IDP guy. So from like week 8 onward towards the end of the year, I got my feet wet. And kind of just been trial by error. So super blessed to see my name up in Fantasy Pros and have, a weekly deal at Fantasy Six Pack. And I don't know, it's all just kind of been a blessing unfolding,
That's awesome, man. It's kind of crazy you say you got started with like a UK site. I originally got started doing fantasy basketball work, Dynasty, like 8-9 years ago, and weirdly with the site out of New Zealand. So it's kind of crazy how like that just kind of how it works out sometimes.
It was cool.
Yeah, it really kind of is. And then, I feel like you said, I feel like I'm in a really good spot now being with Fantasy Six Pack. Joe's awesome. I mean, he's killing it in his offensive ranking contest too. It's just so much talent on the website. It's pretty awesome. So what we're going to do today, everybody, is we are going to kind of go through Mase's top 5 linebackers, defensive linemen, and defensive back. I'm going to kind of grill him a little bit on a couple of them, to kind of ask him a couple of questions about why you got some guys where. After that, we're going to kind of do a brief breakdown on a couple different scoring formats, because I feel like that really can change the experience. Like, I feel like the first few IDP leagues I had, they were set up to where they didn't really matter. They all kind of scored the same, and it was really low. And so it took me a while to get into it. And then I kind of started playing in a couple other formats where, they became more important. And at that point I was hooked, and that's my favorite format to play now. And then we'll wrap up with a little bit of kind of just your thoughts on how Mase likes to build his Dynasty IDP teams. And then just a little bit of talk on some incoming rookies next year. So we've got a lot to get to. So let's go ahead and hop into this. We'll start at the linebacker position, which I feel like is kind of one of the 2 cornerstone positions you usually build around in your IDP leagues. So looking at the top 2 on your list, you got Roquan Smith with the Ravens, and then Foy Olakun with the Jaguars there. So I think when you're looking at it, like you like the guys that get a lot of tackles here at this position. I'm assuming that's why you got them up at the top. I think like Roquan's already like over 100 tackles, like 115 or something like that. And Foy led the league the last 2 years, I believe, in tackles, and right up here again. So I guess, why do you have these guys up top, or is it just the tackles? And if so, like how big is the gap between these 2 and then the rest of the list?
Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and speak on Olakun. You're talking about tackle king 2 years running, maybe 3 if Roquan doesn't, hold up. I mean, Roquan did have 21 tackles. That's both combined and assisted, I think, last week. So, these guys are insane. These guys are not only like that, but they're also really, really, really good football players. The opportunity is there, and regardless of rotation or what's going on, those are the guys that are going to be on the field more than likely 90 to 100% of the time. So when you go to any startup dynasty draft, those guys are definitely going top side in the first round. Placement depending on the scoring system. So those are just guys that are, they're kind of like guaranteed both good football players, and they're both good for your IDP team, just because you can try to scheme around them, but regardless, they're going to put their nose on the ball.
Right. I mean, and Roquan, they're both actually good examples of that, where they produce for an old team, were able to step into a new team, new system, and just immediately right back in there, and they're productive like they were before. Number 3 on your list is where it starts to get interesting. And I actually would have one of the other guys on your list here at number 3 personally. But we got Quay Walker, who is one of my favorite teams. And a few of my teams I'm rebuilding, he's pretty much the only defender I'm hanging on to. I'm like, all right, this is going to be my cornerstone I'm building around. So the production hasn't been there consistently. It's been a little bit of injuries. Then he has Devondre Campbell there. But why you got Quay Walker number 3? Is it just talent's going to win out here? Or is there something else that you kind of see you developing here?
Yeah, so when the Packers drafted him, they drafted him because he was, really good at the position, obviously. He played at Georgia and whatnot. But there's a lot of room to grow. He's had a good progression. You've seen it I guess he's had a lot of senseless penalties in his past. He's kind of pulling that back. He's learning from Devondre, doing a lot of good things, and I think the future is his. He's going to get another contract, so it's more about not looking at your typical 2 to 3 year window. I'm thinking this guy's going to be relevant for the next 5, 6, 7, hopefully years, right? He's going to be a cornerstone, and he's not getting roughed up a lot because he's not put into a situation all the time to where he has to be the main guy. However, he can also wear the green dot, and he can take a step back and be a Bravo. And we see guys like Jordan Brooks also be a Bravo to guys like Bobby Wagner, and they're still producing, putting up numbers, maybe not top 10 every week, but something like that. When you're looking for a player, at least long-term for me, I'm looking at a guy who's young and who can take charge and be there. So I know Nick Bolton's next, so I'll just go ahead and roll into him because I feel like that's what you're going to say. So with that, he did get the I guess like the rookie of the year for the actual Chiefs, his rookie season. That's what kind of put me onto him. They didn't have a lot of linebacker trust in before that. He is in there, but he has been injured a lot this year. There are other guys in that rotation like Willie Gay. I actually think Leo Chenal is going to step up a lot next year. They like to send him. So it's not really a knock on him as a player. It's just right now the availability. And then going forward, I feel like there's a little bit more longevity, I guess, with Quay at this point than Nick.
Sure.
But when we're talking top 5 guys, all these guys, I guess, on a week-to-week basis, probably Bolton upside a little bit more. They're going to be in my top tier regardless. It's just going to be like popcorn based on matchup. So to really say, like, is this guy better at 2 or 3 or 3 or 4? It's kind of like, depending on the week, I guess. So right now with Nick Bolton being injured, I just kind of put him down a little bit and put Quay up.
That makes sense. I agree with that too. I like Quay a little bit more there. But number 5, the guy on your list here, this is actually the guy that I would have at number 3 in my ranks personally. And full disclosure, this could just be because of my experience as a real NFL fan. I'm a Cowboys fan. And the last 3 or 4 times we've played these guys, I swear to God, Fred Warner is like Superman out there on the field. Like every single time something bad happens, that dude is right in the freaking middle of it. And so it could just be he has his best games against like the team that I'm most locked in on. But for me, he's number 3. I mean, he's just kind of a step below those top 2 in terms of tackling. And then I think he's arguably like the best pass defender on this list here. So why do you have Warner down at number 5? And is it kind of, how big is the gap between him and then the guys you kind of said were kind of your top tier guys?
Yeah, so exactly what you're saying. Fred Warner is the leader of defense, and I think he's the best middle linebacker in the league. I am also a full 49ers fan, so it's kind of funny to hear the other side of the coin. You're like, God, every time something bad happens, I'm like, dude, every time something good happens on our defense, right there. So with that said, they also have Drake Greenlaw there. He can really pop up at any time, and he has been known to not steal tackles, but kind of take a couple away from Fred Warner. Fred Warner is ridiculously good in pass coverage, and he also does quarterback spies. So he's not exactly like a full send, like they're not shooting him in the backfield. He's more of an instinctual player. So when he does hit, he's going to hit huge for you, and he's going to be the LB1, right? But he does have weeks where he finishes as maybe a bottom end LB2, a mid LB2. And just because of the flexibility and I guess his IDP has nothing to do with his on-field play or anything. It really just depends on the matchup, the way the Niners defense uses him. So
yeah, I mean, he's one of those. He's impactful in fantasy, but he's almost more impactful in the real NFL, and that doesn't always translate into the box score, which is what we're looking at. So if you're looking down the road next year, who is kind of one guy that you could see jumping into this top 5 next year that's not currently here right now?
Okay, I'll just go off top of the dome. Quincy Williams.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, linebacker for the Jets. He's done pretty well. I'm not really sure what CJ Mosley's future is there. So just off top, I'll go with him. Yeah, I'll go with that.
No, that's a good one.
Like a deep throw, Leo Chenal as well, if they don't get another linebacker. Yeah. And also don't forget about what's his name, Jack Campbell from the Lions. He was drafted in the first round. So if people are kind of sitting there like, well, he hasn't done anything because Alex Anzalone, Alex Anzalone's going to be there. So if you want to go out and maybe try to get him for a little bit less in a trade or something, go for that.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. Let's kick it over to the defensive line position. And this, for me personally, is kind of where I like to spend my early IDP picks. Usually I feel better finding tackle-heavy linebackers usually a little bit later than I do these elite defensive linemen here. And we'll start with the guy at the top of your list. And I think that this is a really interesting topic. It's going to kind of blend something we'll talk about later here. But Nick Bosa, you have at number 1, which I don't think is crazy, even though the fact he's only got 4.5 sacks this year. But you kind of look, he's 5th in pressures. And that's kind of like one of those things that you look a little bit more in the box score for the IDP side. So just talk a little bit about Nick Bosa and why you still have him above some of the guys that have definitely outproduced him in IDP leagues this year.
Yeah, honestly, when we're talking about this year and like Dynasty going forward, I probably should pull him back a little bit. It's more of a homer deal. I see Nick Wilson. I'm like, dude, like you just said, the pressures, the percentage, he could be doubled. It doesn't really matter. He's going to get in the mix regardless, taking good angles, even if he's not in on the initial play, trying to make that second effort. But there are guys whose play do translate better over, and that's probably the next few guys we're talking here. But even with these top 5 guys, just like with the linebackers, any of these guys could be the LB1 actuality at any week. And it's kind of just like that board game Trouble. You got the 6 die and you just press down. Whichever one pops up is going to, you know what I mean? It could be any.
Right. I agree with that here. I think Bosa at number 1. I don't think that's crazy. The number 2 guy here, I mean, Max Crosby, he's a guy that in the last 2-3 years has became like a household name, really kind of didn't come out of nowhere. He's always had talent, but he's kind of had some issues that kind of plagued him early. And the number 3 is my guy, Micah Parsons, which he's a guy that I would have number 2 personally, maybe a little bit of homerism there. But just talk a little bit about these two. You look at the guys that are kind of be 4 and 5, and I think they've outproduced them a little bit this year. I guess Crosby is kind of debatable on that one. But why do you have Crosby and Parsons? I guess we'll just go ahead and reveal. We got Myles Garrett, TJ Watt to round it out here. What kind of has you leaning in this direction, how you have them listed right now?
Yeah, okay. So I just have TJ Watt at 5 strictly because of age. He's the lowest out of the group. He's not injury prone, but I mean he's been known to get injured. They got Highsmith on the other side taking up stuff as well. With that said, there are players that are amazing and just swallow everything up, and that is Max Crosby. His pressure rate's insane. I'm pretty sure I saw him the other night. I think the Jets were trying to put 3 guys on him. Didn't matter. No guys on him. It didn't matter. Like he's just one of those guys. I have him slightly above Micah Parsons because Micah Parsons, he does play edge, but he also plays linebacker. There's a lot of disarray on that defense. So he's leading. He's doing a lot more than he's being asked to do. Teams are scheming away from him, and that's being known just because of the linebacker situation and whatnot. So not a knock on his play at all. He's just he's a lot more inconsistent with his weeks. He's either super high, super low. But I guess that's with any kind of elite pass rusher anyways. Max Crosby does get a ridiculous amount of tackles as well. Myles Garrett, he's just another one of those household name guys that is a freak of nature. Good luck blocking him. Could finish first on any of the weeks. I just kind of stuck him there, and I can't give you a reason why, man. Honestly,
no, it makes sense. There's a lot of talent at the top of this position. There really is. I mean, Myles Garrett. I think right now he's leading the lead with sacks. Him and Danielle Hunter, TJ Watt 10.5. So I mean, there's just. I feel like this position is as deep as it's been, and as long as I've at least been playing IDP
but
here.
It's really top heavy. That's the thing about it. We'll talk about scoring systems in a little bit, but that's something that you have to consider when you are drafting. You have to try to figure out which players kind of where the drop off is at certain positions and stuff. And for the defensive line, like you got your top like 6 or 7 guys, and it kind of falls off, and it's like popcorn on sporadically matchups on who's getting what.
One of the guys I did kind of want to ask you a little bit about was Aiden Hutchinson. And I feel like I was kind of looking at all these guys' stats when I was kind of preparing. And his numbers jumped out as like kind of very similar to where Nick Bosa is right now in terms of like the pressure rate, like the sacks are like around 4, just haven't quite been there. But a lot of the other outlying numbers are right there. How far was he off of the cutoff sales for your top 5? And would he be kind of like the one pick, I feel the obvious one to make the jump next year?
Yeah, I think he's 6 or 7. I'm not really sure, but it's one of those. But yeah, it's one of those things to where teams have a year of tape on him. They're doubling him. They're doing whatever they can to get on him. And he doesn't have the respect, I don't think, of like the refs in the league yet. As like a Bosa or a Garrett. Like he's not getting a lot of those calls. You'll see, I mean, TJ Watt or Highsmith, they'll get calls sometimes. But I don't know. I feel like every time I see Aiden Hutchinson rush, his head's all backwards and he's sticking his hand up like, what the heck? So, I mean, the pressure rate's there. He's nasty. It's just he's just very inconsistent with his points. So.
Makes sense. I think that he's one of those that if you look back in a year and he's number 2 or 3 on this list, that wouldn't be crazy just because he's been so close to breaking through this whole time here. So rounding out the defensive side here is the defensive backs. And this is kind of like an interesting one. I feel like there's a lot of different like ways you can attack this position here. Looking at the top of your list, Derwin James. I feel like most people would agree he's probably the most impactful safety in the game. And then after that, it gets a little bit interesting. You got Jalen Petrie and Kyle Hamilton. And as a guy that loves youth and Dynasty, like I love having these guys here. Just kind of talk about these top 3 and what sets them apart from kind of the rest of the field here.
Yeah, so for me personally, it's more like Derwin James kind of on his own island. And then afterwards, I don't know, the more I look at it now, like Jalen Petrie is always there, but he's not being used the same way that he was last year, which I didn't expect him to be, but I still figured that he would be more of a factor. I had people last week like adding me on Twitter, like, is Petrie injured or like what's going on? I'm like, no, he's in. He's just not getting points. Like, I don't know if he's getting schemed away from or what happens. So That kind of happens with a lot of these guys. Kyle Hamilton is a player who last year as a rookie didn't do a lot for IDP, but for actual NFL, the defensive coordinator putting him around in different spots, seeing what he's really good at. Now I think more so that the Ravens secondary is getting healthier. He's playing more in the box. That's going to be really good for his numbers. So that's kind of why I have those guys in the top 3. I might, after this season, they'll be pulling Petrie down. I don't know, French top 5 because it just hasn't been a good year for him.
He's the type of guy that, like, I feel like in a dynasty league, those are good buy low because you can probably get him for like a late second, maybe even an early third. If you have like someone you're talking about that's like, what's going on with this guy? You throw him kind of an older safety that's getting more points right now, and like a late pick, and then you have a guy that you have a lot of upside with next year. The 2 guys rounding out this list here, we got Minka Fitzpatrick and Jaquan Brickser. What kind of has these guys here in the top 5? I feel like Minka's one that is another potential buy low target just because he's missed some time, and I feel like that's a little bit of a consistent thing. So are you worried about the injuries kind of stacking up with him at all, or is it just the talent you kind of overlook it because of the talent?
It's the talent, his ability on the field. The Steelers don't really have a stellar linebacker core right now, even with the signing of Cole Holcomb, who is now on IR. Quan Alexander's done for the year as well. They're just going to be signing guys going in and out, so it's going to be a lot of opportunity there for their safeties. Minka Fitzpatrick is also a guy that just kind of plays by himself on the island. He just, like the defensive coordinator, schemes around and he's a very instinctual player. So he's going to be getting you those big plays, those interceptions, calling game. What do they do now? The seatbelt deals, all that, all those kind of stuff. So to not have him in the top 5 to me would just be insane because when he is on the field, he is amazing. But I mean, the same could be said for Derwin James because he is injured a lot as well. But when Derwin James is on the field, you cannot not put him as your DB1.
That makes sense to me. So we'll kind of start talking about the strategy a little bit of it here. So like DB is interesting because like one of the things that I like to do at this position if I don't get like these top guys is I go look for cornerbacks that are like returners, especially if it's the league that does return yards here. Is that anything that you do at all, or are you more focused on like the tackle and the defensive stats here?
Honestly, I look at the league scoring. I'm like, all right, am I drafting linebackers or am I drafting defensive linemen? Do that accordingly. If a guy like a Cameron Curl falls, then I'll, maybe jump on it. But the more that I draft defensive backs earlier in the drafts, the more I find myself week 11, week 12 being pretty mad at myself for doing that because there's not a lot of longevity with those guys. We had people drafting Jalen Petrie first, second, third round, and he just really hasn't panned out. You got a guy, Cam Bynum, who is like the DB1 right now for the safety for the Vikings. So you have all these guys that are just switching it out. Javon Holland was up in the top 10 for a while too. Yeah. So you can find these guys on the waiver wire going in and out. When I look for these guys, I look for box snaps and stuff. Also, I'm looking for linebacker woes. So the reason why I have Brisker down at 5, I would have had him I think I had him at I was going to put him at 2 or 3, but I'm thinking okay, they have TJ Edwards, they have Edmonds. They're going to be swallowing up tackles. I got Jack Sanborn. That guy swallows up tackles too.
Yeah, he's been good too. Yeah.
So the opportunity just hasn't been there as much. I mean, Brisker can guard guys, just fine. He'll get a pass deflection here or there. But you really, I like a safety is kind of like an add-on to like a hybrid tweener linebacker / DB. Those guys in the box that have a nose for the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned kind of before that when you're drafting, you're looking at the different types of scoring formats. So we just kind of want to spend a couple minutes going over some of the more common ones here. So I think like when it first kind of started becoming a little bit more mainstream, the IDP leagues, the 2 things you mostly heard were like tackle heavy and big play leagues. So kind of just go into like what those 2 different terms mean, and then just like a little bit of how that changes your draft strategy for both of those.
Yeah. So, okay. So for instance, we'll say with the IDP 1, 2, 3 scoring format. All right. Cool. Okay. So I refer to like 3 different scoring systems, the big 3, Fantasy Pro scoring, which is what I have to go off of because of my ranking. And then IDP 1, 2, 3, which is what Sleeper uses, I'm pretty sure. So with the IDP 1, 2, 3, sacks are 6 points. Okay. If you go over to the big 3, sacks are only 5 points, but you also get yards and then return yards, like you were saying earlier. Okay. Now in the Fantasy Pros, a sack is only worth 4 points. So we'll say an IDP 1, 2, 3, Max Crosby's value is really upticked compared to Fantasy Pros, like if you're comparing him to like a linebacker or something, right? So you look for these little indiscrepancies. So we'll say we're preparing for a draft that's in the big 3, and I know that you get sack yards as well as interception return yards. I'm going to wait on my defensive backs and look for guys that are in a position to, I don't know, it's hard to like construct the skies and figure out which guys are actually going to get some plays and stuff. But it's things to look at, which guys are actually going to be there. Maybe like a Winfield, a guy that plays deep, can play the ball, but also go in the box if need be. He can make those decisions on the field as well. Nice little things like QB hits, some of them 2 points, 3 points. So it's really just about, like you said, assessing your points beforehand, looking at your cost and what you're really going to get. So if your sacks are up and you get yards per sack, then you're going to want to take defensive lineman. Maybe take a solo linebacker, like a guy like, I don't know, maybe not Kaiser wait a couple rounds, but a guy that's always in there by himself, like a Quay Walker, someone like that, even though probably someone like that. But I don't know. My mind goes a million different ways because for IDP, there isn't like a PPR or like a
it's a standard.
Right? So but that's kind of like the beauty about it as well. It's like you don't have to put a staple on it. You just have to be super smart. Make sure that you are actually analyzing your space before you go out there and just start ripping guys off the board.
Yeah, I'm a big fan personally, like the IDP 1, 2, 3. Like a few years ago, we kind of started playing like that, like a version of that format before like IDP 1, 2, 3 was the thing. And then once that came out, I was like, yeah, like that's kind of like the way that it made it feel like defensive players actually mattered, and they weren't just kind of like a 6 to 8 point like everybody else every week.
The deeper that you go with IDP and the more positions you have, the more value that IDP carries. Now, IDP 1 through 3 is a good for like a baseline, I think. But like you said, you get a group of humans that you like, a couple people come in and out, whatever, per year. But after a couple of years, you start to get a sense of what your teams or your general manager liking. Like people in the chat are like, what the heck, stats only worth 3 points? So then, next year you uptake it a little bit. Whoa. Why is this guy scoring 85 more than my offensive player? So then you got to down it a little bit. And it just, it's kind of like a rocking ship.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, if you haven't done it, you definitely should add at least one league that's IDP if you haven't done one of those before. So you mentioned a league with sack yards. I've actually never played that. That seems like that would add another kind of element to it. Is there any other kind of rule tweaks off of like kind of your standard, your normal rules you'd had that you'd recommend that you played in leagues that have made it a little bit more interesting?
I personally love true position because it's kind of like offense. Like you don't just, I don't know, you don't have skill player, quarterback. You have true position would be like defensive tackle. Defensive end.
Oh, okay.
You have linebacker. There isn't an inside-outside linebacker. It's just linebacker, and then you have corner safety. So it kind of opens it up a little bit. So now you have to actually look at the corner matchups because in just DBs, a lot of people will be like, well, I don't want a corner. No. And it's like,
I just want a safety. Yeah.
Exactly. But in reality, 1 week, a couple of years ago, I started Emmanuel Mosley for the Niners because he was going up against Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams is going to get 12, 16 targets that game. So if I'm in a high tackle league and tackles are worth 1.5 points, I'm going to put this cornerback on this guy, and he might get toasted a couple times, but on those third down plays and stuff, he's going to get tackled. So it's kind of just looking at stuff like that. So I really like true position because it opens it up. Also, before these last couple of years, defensive tackle has kind of been like a scarcity. We've kind of been blessed in the IDP community and just in the NFL in general with these guys who are coming in and not just stuffing the run, they're blocking passes, getting active on the quarterback, Buckner, Hargrave, those kind of guys. So, it's really cool, and it spreads it more and makes it more valuable. IDP opens up the other 75% of your screen whenever you want. That's my favorite.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I agree with that 100%. So I know you said it varies depending on the league scoring settings, of course. But do you find yourself in general kind of like a philosophy where you kind of like to build one position early over another, or is it just completely dependent on league strategies?
I usually get a top end defensive lineman if I can. I'll get a guy that I really think is going to be a staple, and then I'll get a guy that I think is probably going to make a jump. Or if I don't go defensive line, I'm going defensive line, linebacker, defensive line. I'm looking for guys, pressures, win rates, stuff like that. But also guys who maybe had gotten injured like halfway through the year. Kind of this year, I was up on Rashawn Gary, looking at him going forward, a player like that who maybe people were out on, not really sure about his future. But, he just got paid, so he's kind of a staple there. Kind of the opposite, though, for players like Montez Sweat, who go from a situation where you have Payne and Allen in the middle and then Chase Young on the other side. So he's gobbling up stuff and kind of like just being shunned. Now, all of a sudden, people are like, oh, Sweat's going to go over there and change it. And he's like, well, he's got Gervin Dexter and someone Jones. So he's really going to have to rely on his own ability, and that's not when he's at his best for IDP, I feel like. So.
Makes sense. So you mentioned like pressures and win rates. Is there any other kind of like stats that you don't really get points for in fantasy that you look at when you're looking at like future breakouts or things like that?
Just like mainly QB hits, pressures. I know some people like to look at PFF grades. I don't really look at that. I'm looking at what guys are on the field So like maybe, I don't know, if you have Josh Allen, right? Who's on the other side of Josh Allen? Who's on the other side of Nick Bosa? Who's on the other side of Max Crosby? Sometimes that doesn't really pan out, but whenever you're looking for streamers or other things like that, who's on the other side of Michael Parsons? That's kind of stuff I look at, I guess. As far as like statistical stuff, it varies so much from year to year, and there's so much turnover. You get a couple guys like your Foye Lukens who will repeat, TJ Watt, but there's not a lot of that, especially with defensive backs. So it's really hard to like look at last year's stats. You know, like with offense, you don't want to chase last year's stats. You know, you kind of look at them, put them in your pocket, and then you put that in your process going forward. So it's kind of the same thing, but it's just more sporadic.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you find yourself in general then in like these leagues, are you more open to moving like your star defensive players for offense just because it is a little bit more, I don't want to say random, but there is a lot more randomness to it on the IDP side. Just, you know, if you get schemed away from, like, that can change it. Even if you're doing everything perfect, if you're shutting down the side of the field as like a defensive back, you're not going to have the chance for points.
Yeah, that's kind of the hard thing about IDP though, because a lot of people either don't understand it or like people don't know that like I know about IDP. So they'll send me trades like Devin Singletary for Quay Walker. And I'm like, why would I trade my Quay Walker for you? Like, why? Like, even in whatever scoring format, like, why does that make sense? So you got people that are out there trying to snake people and stuff. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's tough.
Yeah. So last thing here, and I won't push you too deep on this because I'm still very much in my process of scouting the rookies right now, but who are just a couple of kind of the incoming rookies for next year that dynasty managers should have on their radar, just kind of keep an eye for them to watch where they land in the draft this next year, or names to follow down the stretch here?
Yeah, for sure. I'm working on my database and stuff right now, getting ready for the Shrine Bowl. I scout that, so I'm excited. But yeah, I do have a couple names. I'll kind of just go through them and name them off. I did a 5 by position. Since we did
perfect.
Anyways, okay.
Yeah.
So not really in any order, just kind of guys that I've seen or heard about. So defensive line, Dallas Turner, edge for Alabama. Jared Verse, I think that's how you say his name, edge for Florida State. Chop Robinson, edge for Penn State. Lord help me, I'm going to butcher this guy's name. Latu, UCLA. He's an edge. And then Shamar Turner, he's an edge from Texas A&M. He just accepted his impact at the Shrine Bowl. I saw him, seen a couple games from him. He's pretty aggressive and quick off the edge. Not too good like when he's down in a stance, but when he's standing, man, really agile, got a nice bend. Linebackers, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. from Clemson, Tommy Eichenberg from Ohio State.
Yeah,
he sounds like he's going to be a future Cowboy, bro.
I hope so. We need linebackers. So like, we need good ones, man. Like, it was a bummer. Like Leighton Vander Esch going down. Like it was somewhat predictable, but it's still sad. It's just like, man, like I can't believe we did not do more to address this position. I mean, I guess we drafted like Overshawn in the 3rd, and he got hurt. So I mean, that's a bummer. But it's still surprising that the position that's kind of plagued us, we didn't do more to address that this year.
Yeah, no, Overshawn was showing out in camp and stuff too, wasn't he? He's doing pretty well.
Yeah, he had some good hype, but yeah.
Yeah. I've liked Marquise Bell for you guys. Sorry, kind of side note.
He's kind of got that LB, DB.
Yeah, I love those guys.
That's nice.
Those are my favorite. Okay, all right. Barrett Carter, Clemson. Jalen Ford, Texas. Jay Higgins, Iowa. And then DBs, Cameron Kitchens. I keep wanting to say Kitchens. Miami. Kalen Bullock for USC. Kyton Oladipo, Oregon State. Andrew Mukaba for Clemson. He's one of those tweener guys. Jaden Hicks for Washington State, and then Michael Dow, Miami of Ohio.
Okay, nice.
Just some names that I'm writing down. I'll end up scouting
them. It's funny. I've watched a lot of the Pac-12 guys just because I live out here. So like a lot of times that's what's on late. So it's funny. Like I've heard of like pretty much every one of the Pac-12 guys and Ohio State, and the other ones I'm just like, all right, well I'll get to them later.
Right. That's usually how I am too. I'll see a guy float across my timeline. I'll see a highlight and I'll like make a note of it or bookmark it. When I'm laying there trying to get my kids to sleep, they finally fall asleep, and it's like 11. I'm just laying there. I'll like sit there and look at the highlights before I fall asleep, and then write down stuff and put it in whatever. Just try to get the time in where I can.
Nice. Who's your college team? You mentioned 49ers for pro. Who do you like for in college?
I'm a USC Trojans fan.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay.
Tough. I mean, I don't know. A lot of ups and downs this year.
Yeah.
That defense is just not looking amazing. So.
Man, so a whole other conversation, but I want to get your thoughts on kind of USC leaving the Pac-12 and all that stuff. It's, as someone that lives out here, man, it is chaos. Let me tell you.
The whole college landscape right now is kind of. I've kind of taken a step back. I don't really normally watch that much. I mean, I watch enough football on Sunday, Monday, and Thursday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
kind of
have to be a husband the other day.
No, for sure. Yeah, I gotta be
completely.
Yeah. I did coax my kids into watching a little bit of the Army game. I am Army vet, so sometimes I'll make them watch the Wishbone for a quarter or two. They're like, turn it on.
Old school smash mouth football,
dude,
baby.
Change your offense, please. Yeah, no. College has a place in my heart, but it's normally I'll kind of wait until the dust is settled. And then right before, the hype train kicks off in March, kind of get my scouting in between the end of December to the beginning of March, watch the All-Star games, do stuff like that, try to get my knowledge. But the biggest thing that if you're going to be drafting rookies in Dynasty, obviously you want to look at talent, but you need to look at opportunity. Like a guy like Pace, like Ivan Pace, he can possibly work with the green dot, probably will going forward, but he was an undrafted free agent. So a lot of people in the beginning of the year probably weren't drafting him. They're drafting a guy like Campbell who hasn't played a lot. I mean, he's been okay, but he's not getting you IDP points. So these guys out there that just get put in a position because there's not a lot of depth on the roster and they end up putting up points. And it doesn't really matter how good a player is. It matters about how many points they score on your roster.
Right. That's absolutely right. Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you stopping by and doing this. I got to get you back on here after the draft happens just so we can kind of reassess the landscape at that point once all these incoming rookies have homes. The draft, I love football, but I think the draft is my favorite part about any of it.
Best 3 days. Yeah, dude, I love it.
It's so fun, yeah. But awesome, man. Well, where can they find you? What kind of stuff you got coming out here in the future? And just where can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, most of my stuff is at Fantasy Six Pack. I have rankings there as well as Fantasy Pros. I'm doing scouting, kind of wrapping that up here pretty soon, finishing out my rankings and whatnot. I'm also going to appear on a PFF podcast with John Macri in a couple weeks.
That's awesome.
I literally, man, when he asked me, was like on cloud nine, dude. I'm so excited and nervous. It's cool.
Dude, that's cool. You have to send me that link once that's up for sure. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's big shoes to fill and to do. So I hope I do this Fantasy Six Pack team right.
You'll do great. No doubt about it, man.
Yeah. So aside from that, I'm pretty active on Twitter at Cali King 49er17. Join our Discord. Let's talk some IDP, man. We need some more people in.
Yeah, like you mentioned on that Discord here, we'll run it across the bottom one more time. fantasy6pack.net/plans. Become a member over there. On top of all of the betting, our rankings, everything else, like you mentioned, you get to join our Discord. You can get advice that's tailored more specifically to your league formats, kind of how we're mentioned here, especially on the IDP side, scoring changes it so much. This is kind of the best way to get a more direct answer as opposed to just kind of your one size fits all answer that you normally get, more on your Twitter and things like that when you're talking to more people there. So yeah, come join us there, come hang out. Make sure you come back here next week. I'm going to have our leader and our guy over at Fantasy Six Pack, Joe Bond, coming on, and we're going to be kind of doing a little bit of a trade deadline show. I run way too many dynasty leagues, and so my trade deadline I usually have at the end of week 13. So I'm going to kind of round up a lot of the trades that have gone down over the last few weeks, and we're going to kind of grade them in the shoes of a rebuilder, in the shoes of contender, and just kind of some guys we're highlighting for the next few years. It's going to be a lot of fun. He's one of the smartest fantasy football minds I think I've talked to. When I was meeting him at the Expo for the first time, it was pretty crazy. So I'm excited to have him on. He's going to have some really good advice for us. And again, Mase, I appreciate you coming on, and everybody else. We'll talk to you guys next week.